Welcome to Changing Minds and Changing Lives podcast. My name is Julie Sowash. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Disability Solutions. And as this is a pretty new podcast, I want to just welcome everyone. Thanks for taking some time to listen. And, just a little bit about me. I am a person who lives with multiple disabilities. They are all hidden disabilities. So unless I tell someone about them, they're unaware. And that's part of my story and part of my journey. And what we're going to do on this podcast is talk with companies that work with disability solutions, my friends, influencers, and advocates from and for the disability community about the intricacies, the challenges, celebrate the wins in disability employment, and break down and examine workplace trends, government policy, biases, and so much more in an honest, no BS, very human way. And change some minds and change some lives about true disability inclusion, get some more people to work in our community. We're going to have some amazing guests. One today is going to join us in just a minute. We're also going to have Franz Berthoud, who's going to join us to talk about the importance of inclusion in clinical trials and the work that he and I embarked on over the last year and a half on better inclusion for people with disabilities in clinical trials. Jamie Shields is going to join us very soon, founder of the Disabled Society, and so many more. However, today we are talking to Andrea Dalzell, RN, MSN, founder and CEO of the Seated Position, 2021 New Mobility Magazine Person of the Year, the first recipient of the Craig H. Nelson Visionary Prize, a New York City Marathon finisher, and so much more. Andrea, welcome to Changing Minds and Changing Lives.
Thank you so much for having me. Oh my goodness, every time someone says New York City Marathon finisher, I'm like, yes, I actually did that.
I was stalking your Instagram today, and I saw that. Full disclosure, I 2020 ran half a marathon and stopped running again until literally last month. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh man, so impressed and jealous and in awe all at the same time. So thank you so much for joining us. It's so nice to have you here.
Yes.
So tell our listeners a little bit more about you, not just the work stuff, but the Twitter bio. What makes Andrea tick other than marathons?
The advocacy, disability rights, knowing that I have gone through the ringer being a person who has a very visible disability. I use a wheelchair, having a spinal cord injury, growing up in the concrete jungle that is New York City, and navigating a world trying to accomplish what everyone says is impossible. And just for the chip to say that I did it. Right? I think that's typical New Yorker. Just to say that we did it.
Well, I think it's a lot more than you just did it now. You're doing such amazing work. And, I think that there's such a beautiful thing about taking your personal story and using it not just for your own good and your own chip, but what we're seeing with the work that you're doing on the Seated Position, in your writing, in your advocacy to help employers understand the value of nurses with disabilities, the value of humans with disabilities. And so I want to start off kind of one of the things that drew us to engage with you and have you on this podcast was sort of your employment journey. Even though it's you've got a ton of amazing experience and kudos under your belt, you're pretty new grad. You graduated from nursing school in 2018.
Yeah.
And so kind of tell me about what the finding a job after you graduated process was like for you.
Well, I'm gonna backtrack just a tad bit. Like anyone who knows my nursing educational part where I'm like getting into nursing school was already a plight. No one knew if I can do it. It was a question if I can get into clinicals. And then every semester there on fourth was always an I don't know because it's new territory you're charting. If I'm the first for New York State, in that particular situation for that program, I'm navigating new territory. So every semester is new territory to navigate if I know or don't know. So yes, I make it through this educational part because I've navigated. I figured it out from a student level how to be able to navigate clinicals, what nursing I want to be able to do. No one ever asked me during that point in time to be able to guide me afterward,
Do you feel
right?
like that was something that they didn't ask you because it was that you had
Well,
a disability, or because that's not a part of nursing education? Give me a little insight.
so it's not a part of nursing education. What nursing education is to get you to pass your nursing boards. And your nursing boards is to be able to get you to get into a hospital setting. It's bedside, direct care, acute care.
Okay.
But the nursing profession right now, as we know, has grown tremendously. We are in every part of integration that there could be and innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no longer just thinking about the hospital and the patient at the bedside. It's now thinking about your healthcare manager, your insurance coordinator. It's thinking about the person who's at the pharmacy coordinating your meds. It's thinking about the person who's coordinating your care at home or your child at a school. There's so many different aspects to nursing that we forget. So educational part is just to think about your average nurse leaving school and going to a hospital setting and taking care of acute care patients. And
Okay.
that's not just nursing anymore. We've expanded.
Yeah.
So now thinking about someone coming in with a disability, I've navigated this space of education, which would be leading to clinical, which is
Mm-hmm.
hospital setting. Not saying that I didn't want that. I very much wanted it because my goal was to become a nurse anesthesiologist,
Mm-hmm.
nursing anesthetist. That's what I wanted to be. I was like, I'm going to go in the ICU and then I'm going to go in the OR and this is what I want to do. Not knowing how I would navigate that space, just waiting to pass my boards and then get into employment.
Okay.
Nursing, you said how many positions are open right now?
So I looked this morning before we before we chatted. There are 350,000 open nursing jobs on our career center at Disability Solutions, and I mean 350,000.
1,000. Okay.
That's
So
amazing.
that's pretty good job market for nurses, right? And with your when you pass your boards, it's national. You can go any state in America and find a nursing job
Okay.
because that's you just apply for your license, you get it transferred, you can get a job.
Okay.
Okay? So I'm coming out of school and all of my friends are getting jobs. All of my peers are instantly getting jobs. And here I am going to job after job interview, job interview, job interview, because here it is. The market is open. It is lush for us. And I'm getting rejected. I'm going into the hospitals and I'm getting rejected automatically, not by face to face saying, oh, we can't hire you, because who's going to do that? Nobody's going to openly discriminate. But bias plays a part in how you interview, regardless
Mm-hmm.
if you acknowledge it or not. So, me automatically rolling into a hospital setting, where in hospitals, rolling in or rolling onto or being on something that rolls automatically equals disabled
Mm-hmm.
and unworking. Here I am being a functional disabled person rolling into your office asking for employment in a job that requires you to be hands on. Those two don't agree in anyone's brain because there's no representation of that in physical world.
Mm-hmm.
We're not seeing it. So
And I
therefore,
think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So therefore, when I'm sitting through these interviews, I'm trying to make these one-on-one connections to be able to say, I did this in clinical practice in my nursing education. I've gotten through this. I've been able to navigate this. There's no connection there because all they're seeing is this disability that might hinder my ability to do something.
So I'm curious as to how much more at least in my perception, the bias would exist within the healthcare setting because of the way medicine approaches disability,
Mhm.
and quality of life and all of those things, right? We saw so much of that just gross, dirty laundry get aired during COVID. I think
Yeah.
the world learned a lot. Um, but when you're sitting there with a potential boss, a potential peer, in the healthcare setting, is your disability even more stigmatized because of the education that you received, or that the healthcare industry receives.
Well, of course, because we have stories now where during COVID or during that time of transition where COVID wasn't at its peak, but we were still hiring online and no longer bringing people into our facilities to do one-on-one hiring. Look at the job spike in disability employment.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was getting hired, including nurses with disabilities. And I can speak to this because if anybody goes online, and she'd love me for tagging her, Ryan Mason, who is a nurse, she was an RN in the ED who has a disability and was able to get hired into a mother baby unit when before she was getting rejected from a clinical practice.
Yeah.
So, and it's the same thing for me. I didn't get hired into clinical practice until COVID hit New York at its peak. And hospitals were just scrambling to have anybody with nursing education in their facilities to be able to help
Really.
because the governor put out the call. It said,
Yeah.
please, for retired nurses to come out of
That's
retirement.
incredible.
We needed the help. And that's when hospitals were putting out their literal HR numbers, asking them, send your resumes, send your credentials, and we would have you onboarded in less than 24 hours.
And so that's how you got your first gig.
Hi. Andrea
Holy
has
cow.
made it in. I have got into the world, and think about it. I have a disability. I shouldn't even be running into COVID. I should be thinking about me and making sure that I'm protected. And here I am saying, well, I also need a job. I also have student loans to pay. I
Yeah.
also have to figure this out because if I don't, then where do I fall into the statistical sense of life?
Yeah.
So
And
there's
and
that
every
push and motivation, right?
Yeah, and every minute you don't have a job is another minute that it makes it harder to get that first job. So, you took the job at peak COVID in one of the New York hospitals or healthcare
Yes.
settings, and tell me then, it had to be just it's such an unusual situation because everything was a hot mess. And so were you just kind of thrown into it and it was almost less of an issue that you had a disability because everything was chaos, or did you still hit a lot of those same kind of usual barriers?
I hit all the usual barriers as if I were the Tasmanian devil just going around in circles. And I kid you not. And this is no fault to anyone because once again, representation isn't there. So, there is this very small expectation that someone with a physical disability is actually giving, like they're actually being able to produce because there's no representation to pull from, even though there's so many of us doing it. And I get that. But the bias is thick. So even on my first night on the unit, I get asked, have I ever worked on a unit before? And let's just take a step back for one moment. I said I have a disability. I didn't say what age. I had it since I was 5. I stopped walking when I was 12. If anyone goes, and everyone does, goes through puberty, you know how hard that is to go through when you're in junior high school, middle school, whichever it is. These are when you learn your social skills, how vocal you're going to be, how much you're able to commit to society is going to be based on these fraction of years. And this is when I was a rebel. So fast forward now, and here I am in this setting where I'm like, not only have I been a patient for my entire life, so I understand the chaos of what is happening here, because it is the chaos of what my life has been previously just as a patient. But yes, I've gotten through nursing school. I've proven that I can be at clinical standard, and my outside knowledge of vent and how to do trach care actually helps a lot of nurses that have been in the field that are not vent nurses or trach nurses, and here I am as a new grad with knowledge. So you can actually utilize me where you need me. So as soon as they knew that, they threw me into the ICU.
Oh, wow. So what
So
you're saying is your lived experience has made you a better nurse and a
has
better
made, right,
peer.
a better peer, a better nurse, someone that's all around able to understand the chaos because I've lived it on the inside world. And that's something that a lot of people can't speak of. Let's think about those that have gone through some major medical issues in their life where they've been in and out of hospitals for some time. They understand the lingo because they start to hear what's happening around them all the time. Now I've done that my entire life from 5 years old. And
Right.
here I am graduating from nursing school in 2018, I'm already in my 30s and I have understood the medical world at a level where most nurses have never.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like you're coming home because you're so comfortable in that setting, whereas everyone else has the sort of newbie worries and fears and lack of confidence. I think that's a really good point. Is, whether it's disability or any type of diversity, is that we see so much impact on patient experiences, on customer experiences, whatever they are, when someone who has lived in your shoes is able to also serve or care for you in a way that no one else, that I couldn't understand, that someone else who does not use a wheelchair wouldn't understand.
Right. And then let's step away from the personal for just a second.
Yeah.
Every single business, I believe, that employs over 50 people has to put on that they're an equal opportunity employer and they do not discriminate based on sex, race, gender, uh, disability, so on and so forth. What does that statement actually mean? We can't just be performative by putting it on because it's a federal law.
Yep.
But if I really wanted to, all of those interviews, I went through 76 interviews to land a clinical placement job at the peak of COVID. If I wanted to, even the ones that I had recorded, because New York is a single record state, I do not need to let somebody else know. And I had to record some of my interviews because I thought that I was doing something wrong. I thought that it was me. I thought that what I was saying or how I was conveying things was probably turning off nurse managers. So I recorded myself in an interview so that I can have a coach tell me if I was doing something wrong. Right. And just trying to take that responsibility on me
Mm-hmm.
when I could have actually just said, you know what, you're discriminating against me.
Yep.
You're literally saying that I'm not capable because of the fact that I can't walk. You asked me how would I be able to do CPR, and this is a question that's raised in the nursing community in general. How are you able to do CPR from the seated position? How could you run to do a code? How could you push a gurney down a hall? Well, I asked that for a nurse who broke her wrist. I asked that for a nurse who may be having hypertensive issues, or someone who's diabetic who's not under control but can work a unit still. You don't know those invisible disabilities. What if someone has severe anxiety and you don't know when that anxiety is triggered, but you're questioning my disability because it's visible?
Because you can see it. Yep. Yeah. 100%. So you
And
got
that
the
doesn't
job.
exclude them either.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, it doesn't exclude them for questioning someone's invisible indisability that's been forthcoming. It's
Oh, yeah.
just they get to do it for me right off of the bat. So I can't
Yeah.
even get my foot in the door.
There's a lot of assumptions that go along with it, right? I mean, when I first started disclosing my mental illness, you could see everybody's face going like, she's either faking it or she might kill us. Like there was that wide range of assumptions that happen. And fortunately, I'm in a place where I get a different, I have the ability to tell that story, and you are there now. But it took that time. It took that person who finally, in the midst of COVID, said, yeah, we need to get this woman on the floor and get her to work because we need bodies.
Right.
And sort of my expertise, my background is really in the systems and the processes that create inequity around the hiring process and all of those things. And I just find it interesting and remarkable that you took the time to say, maybe this is me. Maybe I need to get an interview coach. Maybe I need to make sure. And as like talent acquisition people, recruitment people, HR people, I think a lot of times we lose the human side of what we do. And so, stories like yours and your willingness to share the personal side and the professional side help remind people in TA that we're not just pushing buttons. We're not just, making workflow decisions. Like, we are changing people's lives when they get that job.
Yeah.
Especially people who are going to have extra barriers to employment, like people with disabilities. So I thank you for sharing that. And, I guess I would be curious, just, what would be some of your advice to a new grad or even an experienced nurse with a disability who is looking for that next part of their career arc? What are some of the lessons that you learn, mistakes, best practice into actually sort of finally getting into a role?
These are two very different questions. So let's
I tend to
separate
do
them.
that.
um, for the new grad, my advice is don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking that you don't belong. You very much have gone through this. You have very much proven yourself. You've passed your boards. You are here. You belong, period. Don't let anyone tell you what direction you should be in or where is best or easy for you. You already know the answer to that. You went through your clinicals. So find a home. Start small. You don't have to start big, and find people that you can work around. Even if that means reaching out on Facebook or LinkedIn first. We're out there. Like, they're more than willing, nurses always wanting to hire. You just have to think smaller rather than bigger sometimes. So that's to the new grad. Uh, And then to the person who has a disability in nursing, who's probably been my veteran nurse, who's probably the new nurse that something has happened, they've been injured on the job, they don't know what's going on, life is changing. The best thing about having RN behind our name is the fact that we can go anywhere and do anything. And you have to believe that. I'm sorry that you are having a career shift, but maybe this is beneficial. And I think that we owe it to the profession and we owe it to ourselves to show people that it's not just about being bedside care nurses anymore, that our care extends beyond what people can think and imagine right now. And the fact that the internet is so connected, it gives you some leeway and stop thinking so in the box.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you gave me something completely different to think about earlier when you said, like, we aren't just bedside care nurses anymore. The world is huge. The world is there are so many more opportunities than what existed before.
Yeah.
And before we kind of go to our closing questions, I had one more question I wanted to just ask you about the notice of proposed rulemaking that came out, I think, 3 weeks ago, about the need for enforcement around access to accessible diagnostic equipment. And as both a healthcare professional who needs to know how much someone weighs, how to get a proper exam, all of those things, and also as a patient with a disability, talk about a little bit about the importance of the federal government coming in to finally start looking at some equitable and accessible justice for healthcare for our community.
I think it's about time. Add explicit. Right? I think it's about time. I think, the ADA was signed over 30 years ago. And let's think about that. That's just 1990. And this is supposed to make sure that there's accessibility wherever there's federal dollars. The fact that healthcare systems today in 2024, we're in February already of 2024, and we are now seeing the federal government say, you know what, we're going to enforce and make sure that there's accessible equipment. Let's not just think about someone who is unable to walk or unable to stand. Let's think about someone who may be overweight, and we're shaming them. They can't get into a CT scanner or an MRI scanner. So now their diagnoses are pushed out longer.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, when do we say enough is enough? And when do we as healthcare providers hold ourselves accountable for making sure that these things actually happen? So now that the federal government's stepping in and saying, you know what, our federal dollars are supposed to be allocated to this, let's make sure that this is actually happening. Yes, that makes sense to me. Finally, it makes sense. But let's just make sure that it can actually pass, and let's make sure that that enforcement actually goes through, and that we're actually holding these industries accountable. And I know that industries don't necessarily want to hear that. I become the bad guy when I say that. But let's also be real. When you allow for these doors to open, and you're not just closing off to this small community anymore, you're opening the door for more and more people to utilize your services, because now you're becoming inclusive to their care, sorry.
Yes.
and you're becoming inclusive to their care. So, I mean, that just to me makes sense. You're spending money right now to make money in the long run, because more and more people are going to be able to access these services.
Yeah, it's a good business decision.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And I swear we'll probably be saying that until we let the next generation of advocates come on the floor for us. But these are incredibly important strides and long overdue, but I'll take the wins we can get, and we'll keep pushing. So 2 last questions. You are my first victim of my standard questions.
Okay.
So first question, and only one this time, is what is one thing that you would tell a hiring manager, a people leader, a healthcare administrator that would change their minds about the talent value of people with disabilities in their workplace?
Oh my gosh. You say that you want people who are not lazy and want to work. Disabled people will be that person. They will not call out because they are so ashamed that the moment that they call out of work, that you think that they're less or not worth it because of the fact that their disability played a part there. I'm telling you, they will think twice before calling out because they are so upset with themselves because of that internalized ableism. They want the job. And I'm putting people out there right now because we are shameful when we call out. We don't want to call out. It is a part of like this ingrained ableism. So managers, I'm telling you right now, you talk about people with disabilities not like possibly not showing up or calling out too much. They're the ones that are going to be thinking twice before they call out, and they're probably going to be the most productive person on your team.
I love that. I love the super bluntness of it too. Don't beat around the bush, just say it. Second question. What is one action or story or event that's happened in your life that helped change your life as a person with a disability?
When I was in nursing school, I didn't know if I was going to stay. I was actually contemplating dropping out. I was so bogged down by trying to prove that I can do it. And I was helping a peer out. There was a patient at clinical practice that was giving nurses a hard time. She didn't want to get up. She didn't want to go PT. She was newly diagnosed stroke. So she was paralyzed on one side of her body. And my peer was just asking for help because we just need to get a report done so that we can hand it into our professor. So all we're thinking about is getting things done. So I go into the patient's room to help her. And this patient looks at me, roll into her room, and starts sobbing, crying, like boo-hooing. And I'm thinking something's wrong at this point. Maybe that's why she didn't want to get up, get the nurse, call our instructor. And I just roll right up to the bed and I start putting on the blood pressure cuff to at least get like some vitals. And she looks at me and she says, "I thought my life was over." I'll never forget the words. And I said, "I don't know what you mean. Life is only over if you stay in this bed. You got to tell me what's wrong." And she said she never saw a nurse in a chair, basically. So she thought life was over with her new diagnosis. In that moment, I knew what she meant in that moment, but I didn't play into it. But I felt in that moment that I was reassured that I was right where I was supposed to be and that I wasn't supposed to give up. And here we are. 6 years later, I've been a nurse now 6 years, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
So that is incredible. You changed her life.
Yeah.
And she changed your life at the same time.
At the same time.
And put you on this mission that you're on today. That's amazing. So, Andrea Dalzell.
Yes.
How do we find you? Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram? Give us the deets.
Yeah, so I am known as the Seated Nurse, and you can find me at that hashtag @ on all of the platforms at the Seated Nurse, or you can go on to @theseatednurse.com and find me there.
Great. Andrea Dalzell, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Changing Minds and Changing Lives. Subscribe, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, all of the places, and tell me who we should be talking to change minds and change lives together for true disability and inclusion. Until next time.